In this sublesson, we're going to use various techniques to go through and transform and cleanse our data. In particular, we're going to take a look at using replace values, use the split columns functionality, and we're going to work on formatting our columns. So let's go ahead and get our Power BI desktop file open that supports this sublesson. Okay, once again at the GitHub repository, I'm going to open up sublesson 13 file here and give it a moment. Okay, so with the desktop file open, we are going to go into the Power Query editor like so. And what we're going to do first is we are going to go to our product query. And what we're going to do in this instance here is we're going to first take a look at the product description column. We can see that a number of the rows here in the product description column have a null value. And we'd like to go ahead and clean that up by replacing it with the word no description. So the way that we're going to do that is we are going to right click on the product description. And what we'll do is to scroll down a little bit and we can choose this option called replace values, which is going to give us a dialog box where we can go ahead and type in what we want to search for and what we want to replace. Okay, so I've gone into the value to find. I've typed in the word null in all lowercase, keeping in mind that the M language is a case-sensitive language. So I've typed in null in lowercase, and what I want to replace it with is the phrase no description. And that's going to make it a little bit more clear at the reporting level whether there is actually a description or not, as opposed to leaving people wondering with a blank or a null. We're actually just going to call it out and say this particular product has no description. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And what we're going to see here is in the column here now, any of the values that had null now say no description. And if I want to take a look at the other values that are in this column, what I can do is click this drop-down box and take a look at all the other descriptions that are in here. Okay, so that is cleansing the very first column that we want to take a look at in the product query. So the next columns we want to look to cleanse are the ones that we did back over in the merge queries. And our product subcategory and product category, we actually want to get rid of these null values as well and replace it the word internal product. So in this particular data set, any of the rows that have a null value are internal products that are used to build things that we ultimately sell as AdventureWorks. So if we were to kind of scroll over to the right-hand side and take a look at the products that have a null value, these are all the parts that we're going to use to actually build bikes that we're actually going to go ahead and sell. So if I just scroll back over the right-hand side, the two columns that I actually want to change values for are the product subcategory and product category. So the nice thing is I can actually go and replace these values both at the same time by clicking the Control key and highlighting both columns. So now what I can do is I can actually right click and say replace values, and I can go ahead and do the exact same thing. So I'm just going to go ahead and type those into the field. And I can see that what I want to do here is search for the value defined of being null, all in lowercase once again, and I'm going to replace that with internal product. Once again, and click OK, and we'll notice across both of these here now, internal product has been replaced wherever the word null showed up. So now I can go into the product subcategories and take a look at all of them, and everything has a value. I can do the same thing with product category. I can see that I've got bikes, clothing, components, accessories, and of course the internal product. So I've gone through here now and I've cleaned up the values in my actual product query. The next thing that I'm going to do is I am going to go over to my sales territory query and do a little bit of cleansing here as well. So we can see that I've clicked on sales territories, keeping in mind one thing that I did earlier on was I moved the sales territory, which is in the first rows, up into the headers. So if I just rewind on these applied steps, this is what things look like at the end of the extract process of bringing things in. Then I went and did a promote headers. And then I went through and did a change data type. Even though this change data type is doing nothing, this is extraneous. So I'm actually just going to go ahead and get rid of that because it doesn't really add any value because this actually did have the correct data type on top of things. Okay, so what I really came to this particular column in this query to do was to split these values apart. So I can see a pattern inside of this column right here. I can see I've got what appears to be continents on the far right, countries going down the middle, and then regions over here. So what I'm going to do is go to the Home tab, and under the Transform group of columns, I can see there's a transformation command here called split column. So I'm going to click on that. I'm going to say by delimiter, and Power Query is pretty smart. It's going to go through and say it's a custom delimiter. It figures out the pipe symbol, which is above the enter key on most keyboards, and it's going to do the split at each one of the occurrences of the delimiter. So I'm going to click OK. And now my columns have all been split apart. Okay, so that's the first thing that we want to do here. The next thing we want to do here is actually each one of these columns, if we were to go back a step here, has some, or a couple steps I should say, it has some spaces in between these delimiters here. So what I want to do is in my last step here, I'm going to highlight all the columns, so they're like this. What I'm going to do here is go into my transform group this time, and under the text columns, there's a format command here, and I'm going to say trim. And what that's going to do is get rid of any white space on the left and right hand side of the character strings to chop that out, which is a very common thing in Excel files and text files. The difference here is it was actually part of the delimiter piece, so we wanted to go ahead and get rid of it. The next thing we're going to do here is actually go through each one of these columns and give them a proper name, because sales territory .1, 2, and 3 are meaningless. So I'm going to go through and rename these to sales territory region, country, and continent. So I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. Okay, so I can see now in my query that all of my columns have been successfully renamed to sales territory region, country, and continent. So now they're a little bit more meaningful. Okay, so what I'm going to do here next now is we're going to go back to our product query to do some cleansing. And we can see here in our product name, we got a bunch of stuff that looks a little odd. So we've got some spaces at the front of some of these product names. We can see that there's a mixture of uppercase and lowercase. And it looks like we've got some of these are being split onto another additional lines here. So we've got some special characters that are embedded into this particular column here. So what we're going to do here is just to show you what is happening with these transformations, I'm going to do two things here first. So what I'm going to do here is actually click on product name and say add column, and I'm going to go to the extract command here, and I'm going to say length. And what that's going to do is actually give me the length of that column at that point in time. And what I'm going to do here now is I'm just going to move it over to the left-hand side and get it close to product name, just so I can show you the differences after all of these things have been completed. So I'm going to call this length before. So it's called length, and I'm just going to say length before, something like this. And that says, here's the length before we actually did all of our transformations. Okay, so that's the first thing we want to do. Now I'm going to actually go through and perform the transformations I want to do. So I'm going to click on the product name. Let's go over to our transform tab and go into format. And what I want to do here first is I'm going to go and run a clean function, which is going to get rid of any special characters that are embedded in my particular rows here. So I go clean, and we're going to notice that some of these had the carriage returns and line feeds that were in the actual columns removed away out of those particular rows. Okay, so that's the first thing we're going to do. The next thing we're going to do is go to the format command, and we're going to say trim once again, so that all the white space at the very beginning and end of the column values for each one of these rows is removed. The last thing we're going to do here is go to the format, and we're going to say capitalize each word, so that we go through and standardize the product name to be a little bit more clean and professional looking. Okay, so we've done quite a bit of work on that particular column. Now, the last thing I want to show you is actually showing you the length of this column after all this work has been completed. So what I'm going to do here now is I'm going to go to the Add Column tab again, and once again, I'm going to click Extract. I'm going to say Length, just to show you what this looks like after all this work has been done. Now I'm going to move that length column over towards the length before, and I'm going to go here, and I'm going to actually call this length after, just so we can see. Now this is something I would never normally do in a production environment, but I really want to show you the differences of what happened to this column before the transformations and after the transformations. So we can see that these columns, for example, the adjustable race column originally was a length of 25 because there's a bunch of white space in here. After I went through and did all the cleansing, it's now of length 15. And we can go through and take a look at a bunch of these row values to see that there are in fact some differences between what the data looked like before from a length perspective and what the data look like afterwards. So once we're done with that, we don't need these columns anymore. So what I'm going to do is just click on length before and length after. I'm just going to go ahead and remove these columns. We don't need them anymore. There's much better ways of doing that. In fact, I wouldn't have put them in there in the first place, other than to demonstrate what was happening with that particular technique. Okay, so we've actually gone through and we've managed to clean up several of our queries. We went through and cleaned up the product query. We did some cleansing of the sales territory query, and then we went back in the product query and did a little additional cleansing as well. So our data sets are now just about complete, and that brings us to the end of this particular sub-lesson on cleansing data.